The sky over New York turned green first. Not a soft green like grass, but a sick, glowing green that spread across the clouds like spilled paint. People stopped their cars in the middle of the street. They got out and stared up, shading their eyes, trying to understand what they were seeing. Within minutes, the same green light appeared over London, over Tokyo, over Lagos, over every major city on Earth at the same moment. It was not natural. It was a signal, and within an hour, everyone would learn what it meant. The first ships came out of the green light like seeds falling from a tree. They were black and shaped like long, curved blades, each one bigger than the largest aircraft carrier ever built. There were hundreds of them, then thousands. They did not rush. They moved slowly and calmly, as if they had all the time in the world, as if resistance had never once crossed their minds. This was the fleet of the Corvette Dominion, an empire that had conquered 11 other worlds before it ever noticed the small blue planet called Earth. General Elena Cruz was in a bunker beneath Colorado when the first reports came in. She was 51 years old, with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too many wars already. She had spent the last 20 years of her life working on something the public did not know about, something buried so deep in classified files that even most senators had never heard its name. That something was called Project Prometheus. "Ma'am, radar confirms over 4,000 contacts entering low orbit," said a young officer at the console beside her. His voice was shaking. "They are not responding to any of our hailing frequencies." Elena did not answer right away. She stared at the huge screen in front of her, watching red dots multiply across a map of the world. Every red dot was a starship. Every red dot was death, waiting patiently above their heads. "Get me the president," she said finally. It took only 2 minutes to connect the call, but those 2 minutes felt like hours. President Sarah Whitfield appeared on the screen, her face pale but steady. She was a former Air Force pilot before she was a politician, and even now, with the sky full of alien warships, her hands were not shaking. "General Cruz," the president said, "talk to me. Is this really happening?" "It's happening, ma'am," Elena said. "This is the scenario we trained for. This is the day." "Then it's time," the president said. "Activate Prometheus." Elena felt her chest tighten. She had waited 20 years for this order, and now that it had finally come, it felt too heavy to carry. "Understood, Madam President, but I need to remind you, Prometheus is not ready to move yet. If we send it out now, before the enemy commits their full force, we lose the element of surprise. We need Earth to survive the first blow. We need to look weak." The president closed her eyes for a moment. "How many people will die if we wait?" "Millions, maybe," Elena said quietly. "But if we act too soon, we could lose everything, every last chance we have." There was a long pause. Then the president nodded, even though it clearly hurt her to do it. "Do what you must, General. But God help us if you're wrong." The alien ships descended over major cities within the hour. They did not fire immediately. Instead, massive beams of light shot down from the black ships and swept slowly across buildings, roads, and open fields, like a scanner reading a barcode. Scientists later realized this was some kind of survey, a way for the Corvette Dominion to study the planet before deciding how to conquer it. The Dominion had done this 11 times before, and each time, they had learned that gathering information first saved them more soldiers in the long run. But humanity did not wait quietly to be studied. Fighter jets scrambled from bases around the world. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. In Washington, D.C., a squadron of F-35s launched missiles at the nearest alien vessel hovering above the Potomac River. The missiles struck true, exploding in bright orange fireballs against the black hull. For one glorious second, people watching from the streets below cheered. Smoke poured from the alien ship. It seemed to be working. Then the smoke cleared, and the ship was untouched. Not a single mark showed on its surface. The missiles had done nothing at all. The alien ship turned, almost lazily, toward the jets that had fired on it. A single beam of blue light shot out, and 3 F-35s vanished from the sky in an instant, turned to ash before their pilots even had time to scream. That was the first blow. It would not be the last. Over the following 3 days, the Corvette Dominion crushed almost every military response Earth could throw at them. Aircraft carriers were destroyed within minutes of engaging. Tanks were melted where they stood. Entire army divisions vanished under waves of energy weapons that no human scientist had ever imagined possible. The United Nations tried to negotiate, sending a delegation under a flag of peace toward the largest alien vessel hovering over Geneva. The delegation was never heard from again. Slowly, terribly, the world began to understand the truth. This was not a war that Earth could win with the weapons it had. The Corvith Dominion was simply too advanced, too powerful, too far ahead in every way that mattered. Cities began to fall under alien control. Strange black towers rose from the ground in captured territories, humming with energy that made the hair on your arms stand up if you walked too close. Soldiers of the Dominion marched through the streets of conquered cities, tall, gray-skinned beings in armor that shimmered faintly, their faces stern and unreadable behind clear visors. They did not seem cruel exactly. They seemed businesslike, the way a farmer might feel about herding cattle into a new field. To them, this was simply another conquest, another checkbox on a very long list. Elena Cruz watched all of this from the safety of her bunker, and every report made her stomach twist with guilt. She knew what was happening in the cities. She knew people were dying, that families were being torn apart, that the world above her was slowly turning into a nightmare. And still, she waited. She had to wait. Prometheus needed more time. Project Prometheus had begun almost 2 decades earlier, in the years after scientists first detected strange radio signals coming from deep space. Those signals were faint, almost impossible to notice, but a team of astronomers in Chile picked them up and passed them along to military intelligence. The signals were not random noise. They were structured, patterned, clearly artificial. After months of analysis, experts concluded the signals were communications between 2 other civilizations, neither of which had anything to do with Earth. It was the first solid proof that humanity was not alone in the universe. That discovery terrified the leaders of every major nation on Earth. If 2 advanced civilizations existed out there, how many more might there be? And what would happen if one of them turned its attention toward this small, defenseless planet? The major powers of Earth, usually locked in rivalry and suspicion, came together in secret. They formed a joint program, hidden from public knowledge, funded through black budgets that no ordinary audit could ever trace. The program's goal was simple to state and almost impossible to achieve. Build a fleet capable of defending Earth against an alien invasion, and build it in complete secrecy, far from the eyes of any potential enemy watching from the stars. They chose to build this fleet in the asteroid belt, hidden among the rocks and dust between Mars and Jupiter, far from Earth's usual space traffic. Robotic mining ships were sent out disguised as ordinary asteroid mining operations, a growing industry at the time that raised no suspicion. Slowly, piece by piece, hidden factories were built inside hollowed-out asteroids. Materials were shipped out under false manifests. Thousands of engineers, scientists, and soldiers were recruited under strict secrecy, many of them told they were working on classified defense research, without ever learning the true scope of the project. Over 20 years, Project Prometheus grew from a desperate idea into something real. A fleet of 200 warships, built using technology that combined the best of human engineering with fragments of alien technology recovered from a crashed probe found in Siberia decades earlier. That crashed probe, small and broken as it was, had given human scientists just enough insight into faster-than-light travel and energy shielding to leap centuries ahead in their research. The fleet was named Prometheus, after the ancient myth of the Titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. It felt fitting. Humanity had stolen a spark of alien knowledge and used it to forge something powerful, something meant to protect them from exactly the kind of threat that was now tearing through their cities. But even Prometheus was not ready for a fight against the full might of the Corvith Dominion. Not yet. The fleet needed more time to finish critical repairs on 3 of its largest ships, and more importantly, it needed the Dominion to overextend itself, to spread its forces thin across the planet in a way that would create weaknesses to exploit. Elena had explained this to the president many times over the years, in countless meetings and briefings. "We only get one chance," she always said. "If we reveal Prometheus too early, before we understand their full strength and their weaknesses, we lose everything in one battle. We have to let them believe we are helpless. We have to let them grow confident. Only then can we strike where it truly hurts." It was a brutal strategy, one that meant allowing suffering to continue on the surface while the truth remained hidden. Not everyone in the government agreed with it. Some officials argued that Prometheus should be sent in immediately, that every day of delay cost more human lives. Elena understood their anger. She felt it too, every single night when she read the casualty reports. But she also understood something else, something that made her hold firm despite the guilt eating away at her. She understood that if Prometheus failed, there would be no second chance. Earth would fall completely, and humanity would become just another entry in the Corvette Dominion's long list of conquered worlds. On the fourth day of the invasion, the Dominion's forces had captured roughly 40% of Earth's major cities. Resistance groups had begun forming in the shadows, ordinary citizens picking up whatever weapons they could find and striking at alien patrols in quick, desperate attacks. These attacks rarely succeeded against the advanced Dominion soldiers, but they were not meaningless. Every attack forced the Dominion to spread more troops across the planet to maintain control, exactly the kind of overextension that Prometheus needed. In a small town outside Manchester, England, a group of former soldiers, led by a retired sergeant named Marcus Webb, managed to destroy a Dominion patrol using old anti-tank mines buried under a road. It was a small victory, barely worth mentioning in the grand scale of the war, but it proved something important. The Dominion was not invincible. Their armor could be pierced. Their soldiers could bleed and die like anyone else. It just took the right weapon, used in the right way, at the right moment. News of small victories like this one spread quietly through resistance networks, giving people hope even as their cities burned. Humanity was not going down without a fight, even against odds that seemed impossible. Meanwhile, deep in the asteroid belt, far beyond the reach of Dominion sensors, the crew of Prometheus prepared for the battle of their lives. Admiral James Thorne, a gruff man in his 60s, who had spent his entire career preparing for this exact moment, walked through the corridors of the flagship, the ISS Liberty, checking on his crew one final time. "How are the shield generators, Chen?" he asked a young engineer working furiously at a console. "Almost ready, sir," Chen replied, sweat on his brow. "We just need another 48 hours to bring Generator 3 fully online." Thorne nodded grimly. 48 hours. That was a long time when people were dying on Earth every single minute. But rushing the work could mean the difference between a ship that survived its first battle and one that exploded the moment it took a hit. There was no room for shortcuts now. He continued his walk through the ship, passing rows of pilots preparing their fighter craft, technicians running final diagnostics on weapon systems, and soldiers checking their gear for the ground assaults that would come later, once the fleet reclaimed control of the skies. Every person on this ship had trained for years for this single moment. Every person understood what was at stake. Thorne reached the observation deck at the front of the Liberty and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, past the darkness, Earth was burning. His home. Everyone's home. He clenched his jaw and made a silent promise to himself. Soon, very soon, Prometheus would rise from the shadows, and the Corvette Dominion would learn exactly what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge of extinction. Back on Earth, in her bunker beneath Colorado, Elena Cruz received an update that made her blood run cold. Dominion forces had begun constructing what their scientists called a resonance tower, near the ruins of Chicago, a massive structure that seemed to be gathering energy from deep within the planet itself. Early analysis suggested the tower was some kind of terraforming device, designed to slowly alter Earth's atmosphere to better suit the needs of the Dominion's own people. If completed, it would make the planet's air toxic to every living human within months. This changed everything. Elena had planned to wait longer, to let the Dominion overextend even further before revealing Prometheus. But if that tower reached completion, there might not be an Earth left worth saving. She picked up the secure line to Admiral Thorne, her hand trembling slightly despite 20 years of training to keep herself calm under pressure. "James," she said, "we might need to move sooner than planned." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Thorne's steady voice answered, "How much sooner?" "Days, not weeks," Elena said. "They're building something in Chicago. If our analysts are right, we might not have the luxury of waiting for the perfect moment anymore." Thorne was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could almost hear him thinking, weighing the risks in his mind the way he always did before every major decision. "Understood," he finally said. "Give me 48 hours to finish Generator 3, and then Prometheus will be ready to fly. After that, General, it's in the hands of every soldier and pilot on this fleet. Elena closed her eyes and allowed herself, just for a moment, to feel something like hope. It was a small flame, fragile and easily crushed, but it was there. After 20 years of secrecy, sacrifice, and waiting, humanity's secret fleet was finally about to reveal itself to the universe. The Corveth Dominion believed Earth was already beaten. They believed the small blue planet was simply another world to conquer and add to their long list of victories, no different from the 11 that came before it. They had no idea what was waiting for them in the darkness beyond the asteroid belt. They had no idea that humanity, cornered and desperate, had spent 20 years quietly preparing a surprise that would shake their entire empire to its core. The green light in the sky above Earth's cities was about to be answered with a light of its own, one built from human determination, sacrifice, and 20 years of secrets kept in the dark. Prometheus was coming, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The resonance tower near Chicago grew taller with every passing hour. Satellite images showed it rising like a black needle above the ruined skyline, surrounded by a ring of Dominion soldiers and armored vehicles. Scientists at Prometheus Command studied every image with growing dread. The tower pulsed with a faint purple light that seemed to breathe, expanding and shrinking in a slow, steady rhythm, as if the structure itself were alive. Dr. Amara Singh, the lead scientist behind much of Prometheus's shield technology, stood in front of a wall of monitors, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She had not slept in 2 days. "The energy readings are climbing faster than we predicted," she said to the small group gathered around her. "If this pattern continues, the tower will reach full power in approximately 60 hours. Once it does, it will begin altering the atmosphere." "Not just around Chicago, globally." "Globally?" asked General Cruz, who had traveled from her Colorado bunker to the hidden command center for this briefing, arriving by a heavily guarded underground transport. "How is that even possible with a single tower?" "We believe it's designed to link with the resonance frequency of the planet's own magnetic field," Amara explained, pulling up a diagram on the screen. "Think of it like plucking a guitar string. Once the tower starts vibrating at the right frequency, the whole planet responds, whether we like it or not. It doesn't need more towers. It just needs time." Elena felt a chill run through her body. 60 hours. That was not much time at all. She turned to Admiral Thorne, who had joined the meeting through a secure video link from the ISS Liberty. "James, where do we stand?" Thorne's face on the screen was tired but resolute. "Generator 3 came online 4 hours ago. Every ship in the fleet has completed final diagnostics. We are as ready as we will ever be, General. I won't lie to you and say every system is perfect, because it isn't. But we cannot wait any longer. If that tower finishes, none of this will matter anyway." Elena looked around the room at the faces of her team, scientists and soldiers who had given years of their lives to this secret project. Every one of them looked back at her, waiting for her decision. The weight of that moment pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. "Then we move," she said. "Admiral Thorne, prepare Prometheus for departure. Target: the skies above Earth. Objective: destroy that tower and break the back of the Dominion's occupation force before they know what hit them." Thorne nodded, a small, grim smile crossing his weathered face. "It will be done, General. See you on the other side." The screen went dark, and the room erupted into quiet, focused motion as officers rushed to relay orders across secure channels. Elena stood still for a moment, staring at the blank screen, and allowed herself one final thought before duty took over completely. 20 years, she thought. 20 years of secrets, sacrifice, and waiting. It all comes down to the next 60 hours. Aboard the ISS Liberty, deep within the asteroid belt, the mood was tense but determined. Admiral Thorne walked briskly through the command deck, giving final orders to his officers. Around him, the crew moved with practiced precision, each person performing tasks they had rehearsed 1,000 times in simulations, but were now, for the very first time, about to perform for real. "All ships report ready status," said Commander Ruiz, Thorne's second in command, a sharp-eyed woman who had helped design much of the fleet's tactical doctrine. 203 vessels standing by, Admiral. Fighter squadrons fueled and armed. Ground assault teams prepped for deployment once we clear the skies. Good, Thorne said. Order the fleet to form up in attack formation Gamma. We travel together. No stragglers. No heroes acting alone. We hit them as one fist, and we hit them hard. Across the fleet, pilots climbed into their fighter craft, small but deadly ships called Falcons, built using a hybrid of human aerodynamics and alien propulsion systems recovered from the Siberian crash site decades earlier. Each Falcon was armed with plasma cannons capable of punching through Dominion armor, a weapon that had taken engineers nearly a decade to perfect. One of those pilots was Captain Jake Torres, a 28-year-old former commercial airline pilot who had been recruited into Prometheus 5 years earlier. He sat in the cockpit of his Falcon, running through his pre-flight checklist with hands that were, despite his best efforts, slightly unsteady. "You nervous, Torres?" asked his wingman, Lieutenant Mei Lin, over the comm channel. Her voice was calm, almost amused, though Jake suspected she was just as nervous as he was. "A little," Jake admitted. "I keep thinking about my sister. She lives in Chicago, not far from where that tower is. I haven't heard from her in 3 days." "Then let's go make sure you get to hear from her again," May said. "Focus on the mission, Jake. Everything else comes after." Jake nodded to himself, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes for just a moment. When he opened them again, his hands were steady. The order came through the fleet-wide channel a few minutes later, spoken by Admiral Thorne, in a voice that carried the weight of 20 years of preparation. "All hands, this is Admiral Thorne. Today, we fly for Earth. Today, we fly for everyone who has suffered under this invasion, for every city that has fallen, for every family that has been torn apart. We are Prometheus. We were built in secret, in shadow, for exactly this moment. Now, we bring the fire home." Engines roared to life across 203 ships, a sound that had never before been heard outside the hidden shipyards of the asteroid belt. Slowly, then with gathering speed, the fleet of Prometheus emerged from its hiding place and turned toward Earth, ready at last to reveal itself to the universe. The journey from the asteroid belt to Earth took several hours, even at the fleet's impressive speed, faster than light travel, reserved only for the final approach, to avoid detection during the slower cruising phase. During that time, Elena Cruz worked with military leaders around the world, coordinating a plan that would use Prometheus's arrival to trigger a coordinated global uprising against Dominion forces. Resistance groups in every occupied city received the same coded message through hidden radio channels: "The fire is coming home." It was a simple phrase, but every resistance fighter who heard it understood exactly what it meant. Help was on the way, and when it arrived, they needed to be ready to strike. In the ruins of what used to be a suburb outside Chicago, Sergeant Marcus Webb, the same man who had led the earlier attack near Manchester, before being called to help coordinate resistance efforts closer to the tower, gathered his small group of fighters in the basement of an abandoned church. There were only 12 of them, armed with a mix of old military weapons and improvised explosives, but their eyes burned with determination. "We've got our orders," Marcus said, looking around at the group. "When the signal comes, we hit the Dominion supply lines around the tower. We're not going to destroy that thing ourselves. That's not our job. Our job is to create chaos, to pull their attention away from the sky so the real fight can happen up there." A young woman named Priya, barely 20 years old, but already a veteran of 3 resistance operations, raised her hand. "What if the fleet doesn't come, Sergeant? What if this is just another rumor?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He understood her doubt. There had been false hopes before, rumors of rescue that never materialized, promises that turned to ash, but something about the coded message felt different this time. It carried a certainty that previous rumors never had. "Then we go down fighting anyway," Marcus said simply. "Because that's better than not fighting at all." No one argued with that. High above Earth, the Corvette Dominion's occupation fleet continued its methodical work, entirely unaware of what was approaching from beyond the asteroid belt. Overlord Dravask Ix Corveth, the commander of the invasion force, stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Void Reaper, watching reports scroll across his display with mild satisfaction. Dravask was tall, even by the standards of his own species, with pale gray skin and dark eyes that missed very little. "Status of the resonance tower," he said to his aide, a younger Dominion officer named Keswick. "On schedule, Overlord," Keswick replied. "Full activation in approximately 50 hours. The primitive population continues minor resistance efforts, but nothing that threatens our timeline." Dravask nodded, satisfied. 11 worlds had fallen to the Dominion before this one, and every conquest had followed roughly the same pattern. Initial resistance always faded within weeks, as the conquered population realized the futility of fighting back. This world, Earth, seemed no different, despite its inhabitants showing slightly more stubbornness than most. Continue current operations, Dravask ordered. Once the tower reaches full activation, this world's atmosphere will become inhospitable to its native population within months. We will not need to waste further resources on ground combat. The planet will simply become ours to settle, once the current inhabitants are no longer able to survive here. It was a cold, efficient plan, one that had worked 11 times before without fail. Dravask had no reason to believe this 12th conquest would be any different. He had no idea that, at this very moment, 203 human warships were racing toward Earth, carrying with them technology and determination that would soon shatter every assumption his empire had ever made about this small, supposedly primitive world. Aboard the ISS Liberty, Admiral Thorne received the final navigation update from his tactical officer. Admiral, we are 3 hours from Earth orbit. Dominion sensor range suggests we will be detected approximately 40 minutes before arrival, based on our current speed and their known technology. Understood, Thorne said. That gives them 40 minutes to prepare a response. Not much time, but enough that we cannot expect a completely clean surprise. Order all ships to combat readiness. I want shields at maximum, the moment we're detected. Yes, Admiral. Thorne walked to the observation window and looked out at the blackness of space, dotted with distant stars. Somewhere ahead, though not yet visible, Earth was waiting. His home, his family, everything he had spent 20 years fighting to protect. He thought of his daughter, Sarah, who worked as a nurse in Seattle, and hoped desperately that she was still safe. For Earth, he murmured quietly to himself, a phrase that had become something of a personal mantra over the years of preparation. For everyone. The hours passed slowly aboard every ship in the fleet. Soldiers checked their gear one final time. Pilots ran through mental rehearsals of combat maneuvers they had practiced countless times in simulators, but never in real battle. Scientists monitored the fleet's systems, watching for any sign of malfunction that could prove fatal once the fighting began. Captain Jake Torres sat quietly in his Falcon's cockpit, staring at a small photograph he had taped to the console, a picture of his sister Emma smiling on a beach vacation they had taken together years earlier, before any of this had begun. He touched the photograph gently with 2 fingers. Hold on, Em, he whispered. We're coming. As the fleet crossed into Earth's outer sensor range, Dominion detection systems finally picked up the massive incoming force. Alarms blared across the Void Reaper's bridge, and Overlord Dravask turned sharply toward his sensor officer, his calm expression cracking for the first time since the invasion began. Report, he snapped. Overlord, we are detecting a massive fleet approaching from the outer solar system, the officer said, his voice tight with confusion and alarm. Over 200 vessels, unknown configuration. They are human, Overlord. Their technology signatures match Earth's genetic and material patterns, but their capabilities far exceed anything we observed during our initial survey of this planet. Dravask stared at the display, watching the swarm of red dots representing the approaching human fleet. For the first time in his long career of conquest, something that felt uncomfortably like doubt crept into his mind. That is impossible, he said quietly. Our survey showed no indication of a fleet this size. How did they hide something so massive from us? No one on the bridge had an answer for him. The truth was simple, though Dravask would not learn it for some time yet. Humanity had spent 20 years building this fleet in complete secrecy, driven by a fear so deep and so old that it had united an entire species around a single desperate purpose: survival. All forces, prepare for immediate combat, Dravask ordered, his voice regaining its usual cold control even as his mind raced to adjust to this unexpected development. Redirect 30% of ground forces back to orbital defense. I want every available warship positioned to intercept before they reach the resonance tower. Whatever this fleet is, we will not allow it to interfere with our operation. Across Earth's occupied cities, Dominion soldiers began pulling back from certain positions, redirecting toward orbital defense as ordered. Resistance fighters watching from hidden positions noticed the sudden shift immediately. In the basement of the abandoned church outside Chicago, Marcus Webb's radio crackled to life with an encrypted burst transmission. He grabbed it quickly, his heart pounding as he decoded the message. "The fire has arrived," he read aloud to his gathered fighters. "Repeat. The fire has arrived. All resistance forces, execute coordinated strike now." Priya's eyes went wide. "They're really here?" Marcus felt a fierce grin spread across his face, the first genuine smile he had allowed himself in days. "They're here. Grab your gear. It's time to make some noise." High above, at the edge of Earth's atmosphere, the two fleets prepared to meet for the first time. 200 human warships, built in secret over 20 years of sacrifice and determination, faced off against the might of an empire that had conquered 11 worlds before ever setting eyes on Earth. Neither side fully understood what the other was truly capable of. Neither side knew exactly how this battle would end. But both sides understood one simple truth: this battle would decide everything. Admiral Thorne's voice rang out across the fleet-wide channel one final time before the engagement began. "This is it. Everyone, focus on your training. Trust your crew. Trust the ship beneath your feet. And remember why we're here." On the bridge of the ISS Liberty, the massive form of the Dominion fleet came into view on the main view screen. Hundreds of black warships, arranged in a defensive formation above Earth. Beyond them, faintly visible through the clouds, the blue and green surface of Earth waited, scarred but not yet broken. Thorne took a deep breath and gave the order that 20 years of secret preparation had been building toward. "All ships, engage." The first shots of the battle lit up the darkness above Earth, like fireworks made of raw destruction. Plasma cannons from the human fleet streaked across the void, colliding with the shields of the nearest Dominion warships in bursts of blinding light. For a moment, both fleets seemed frozen in the shock of first contact. Two forces that had never truly seen each other in battle before, suddenly locked in a fight for the fate of an entire planet. Aboard the ISS Liberty, Admiral Thorne gripped the edge of his command console as the ship shuddered from a nearby explosion. "Status report," he barked. "Shields holding at 92%. Commander Ruiz replied, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Their weapons are strong, Admiral, but our shield technology is handling the impacts better than simulations predicted. I think we surprised them." Thorne allowed himself a brief, grim smile. Surprise had always been their greatest weapon, perhaps even more valuable than the ships themselves. The Dominion had conquered 11 worlds by relying on overwhelming technological superiority, and nothing in their long history had prepared them to face an enemy who could actually stand toe-to-toe with their warships. On the bridge of the Void Reaper, Overlord Dravask watched with growing alarm as reports of damaged and destroyed ships flooded in from across his fleet. "This is not possible," he muttered, staring at the tactical display, where human fighter craft wove between his larger warships with surprising speed and precision, striking weak points in his fleet's formation that his own tacticians had never considered vulnerable. "Overlord, we are losing more ships than projected," Keswick reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Their fighter craft are exploiting gaps in our formation that our combat doctrine did not account for. Their weapons technology appears comparable to our own, perhaps even superior in certain configurations." Dravask's mind raced. In 11 previous conquests, the Dominion's overwhelming technological advantage had made resistance essentially symbolic, a brief formality before total submission. This was something entirely different. This was a real battle, one where the outcome was genuinely uncertain, and Dravask found himself unprepared for that uncertainty in a way that unsettled him deeply. "Concentrate fire on their largest vessel," Dravask ordered, pointing to the tactical display, where the ISS Liberty stood at the heart of the human formation. "If we can destroy their flagship, their coordination will collapse. Every war has a heart. Cut it out, and the rest will fall apart on its own." Dominion warships began converging on the Liberty's position, their weapons fire intensifying as they concentrated their assault on the human flagship. Aboard the Liberty, alarms blared as the shield percentage began dropping more rapidly. "Shields at 71% and falling," Commander Ruiz called out. "Admiral, they've identified us as the primary target. Recommend evasive maneuvers." "Negative," Thorne said firmly. "If we run, the rest of the fleet loses its anchor point. Order the Falcon squadrons to focus on breaking up their concentration. We hold position." Captain Jake Torres heard the order come through his comm, and immediately banked his Falcon hard toward the cluster of Dominion ships bearing down on the Liberty. Mei Lin's fighter stayed close on his wing, both pilots weaving through streams of enemy fire, with reflexes honed through years of simulation training that had finally, terrifyingly, become real. "Target their weapon batteries," Jake called to his squadron over the comm. "We can't out-armor them, but we can blind them." The Falcon squadron dove into the heart of the Dominion formation, plasma cannons blazing. Jake watched as his shots found their mark against the weapon turret of a large Dominion cruiser, the impact causing a satisfying eruption of sparks and debris. The turret went dark, one less gun firing at the Liberty. "Nice shot, Jake," May called out, banking hard to avoid a return volley from a nearby Dominion fighter. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, but was, in reality, only about 45 minutes. Ships on both sides burned and broke apart in the cold vacuum of space, debris scattering in silent explosions that would have been beautiful if they weren't so deadly. Humanity's fleet, built in secret over 2 decades, proved far more capable than the Dominion had ever anticipated, but the cost was not cheap. Several human warships had already been destroyed, their crews lost in an instant of superheated plasma and twisted metal. Down on Earth's surface, the coordinated resistance strikes that Marcus Webb and thousands of other fighters around the world had launched were creating exactly the chaos that Prometheus's planners had hoped for. Dominion ground forces, already stretched thin from redirecting troops toward orbital defense, struggled to respond effectively to sudden, well-coordinated attacks on supply depots, communication relays, and patrol routes across every occupied city. In Chicago, Marcus led his small team through the ruins of a shopping center, moving toward a Dominion supply depot that Resistance intelligence had identified as critical to maintaining the Resonance Tower's construction. The depot was guarded by a squad of Dominion soldiers, but with most of their reinforcements pulled away to deal with the orbital battle, the guard force was smaller than usual. "On my mark," Marcus whispered to his team, crouched behind a burned-out car. "Priya, you and Danny take the east side. The rest of us hit from the front. Remember, we're not trying to hold this position. We hit hard, we destroy what we can, and we get out before reinforcements arrive." Priya nodded, gripping her rifle tightly. Despite her youth, there was no fear in her eyes anymore, only fierce determination. "Understood, Sergeant." The attack began with a well-placed explosive charge that tore through the depot's main storage building, sending a plume of fire and smoke into the sky. Dominion soldiers scrambled to respond, but Marcus's team was already moving, striking quickly and precisely, before melting back into the ruins of the city. It was a small victory in the grand scale of the war, but every disrupted supply line, every destroyed depot, every distracted Dominion patrol was one more crack in the Empire's control over Earth's surface. Back in orbit, the tide of battle began to slowly shift. Admiral Thorne, watching the tactical display with a practiced eye, noticed a pattern forming in the Dominion's tactics. "They're relying entirely on brute force," he observed to Commander Ruiz. "No creativity, no adaptation. They've never had to fight an enemy that could actually challenge them before." "Should we exploit that, Admiral?" Ruiz asked. "Absolutely," Thorne said. "Order the fleet to shift into Formation Delta. I want our smaller ships drawing their attention, while our heavier cruisers flank from above and below. If they've never faced real tactical resistance, let's give them a lesson." The order rippled across the fleet, and human ships began executing a complex maneuver that had been practiced countless times in simulations, but never before under real combat conditions. Smaller human vessels darted forward, drawing Dominion fire and attention, while larger cruisers swept around the flanks of the enemy formation, in a pincer movement designed to catch the Dominion fleet in a crossfire. Overlord Dravask watched the maneuver unfold on his tactical display with growing frustration. "They're flanking us," he snarled. "Redirect the second and third battle groups to intercept." But the order came too late. Human cruisers opened fire from above and below simultaneously, catching a significant portion of the Dominion fleet in a devastating crossfire. Ships exploded in rapid succession, the Dominion formation breaking apart as commanders struggled to respond to an attack pattern they had never encountered before in 11 previous conquests. "Overlord, we are losing formation cohesion," Keswick reported, his voice now openly alarmed. "Multiple vessels reporting critical damage. The humans they are outmaneuvering us." Dravask's hands clenched into fists at his sides. This was not supposed to happen. In 11 worlds, no species had ever come close to matching the Dominion's military capability, let alone surpassing their tactical execution in real combat. And yet here, above this small, seemingly insignificant world, everything he understood about warfare was being challenged. "Pull back the outer flank," Dravask ordered, forcing himself to remain calm despite the chaos unfolding around him. "Consolidate our remaining forces around the Resonance Tower's defensive perimeter. If we cannot win this battle in open space, we will protect the tower at all costs. Its completion remains our primary objective." As the Dominion fleet began a fighting retreat toward Earth's atmosphere, concentrating their remaining strength around the airspace above Chicago, Admiral Thorne received an urgent report from his tactical officer. "Admiral, the Dominion fleet is consolidating around coordinates matching the Resonance Tower's location. It appears they intend to make their final stand there." Thorne studied the display for a long moment, calculating the risks of pursuing the enemy into a heavily defended position versus allowing them time to potentially reinforce or complete the tower's activation. Every second of delay brought that tower closer to full power, closer to poisoning Earth's atmosphere beyond any hope of recovery. "We can't let them dig in," Thorne said finally. "Order the fleet to pursue. We finish this now, before they have a chance to regroup." The human fleet surged forward, pressing their advantage, as the battered but resolute Dominion forces retreated toward the skies above Chicago. Below, on the ground, Marcus Webb and his team watched from a rooftop as the battle in orbit began to descend toward the atmosphere, streaks of fire and light visible, even through the thick smoke that hung over the ruined city. "Look at that," Danny, one of Marcus's younger fighters, breathed in awe, staring up at the distant flashes of combat visible even from the ground. "They're actually winning." Marcus watched the distant battle, with a mixture of hope and dread. Winning the space battle was only half the fight. The Resonance Tower still stood, its purple light pulsing steadily, counting down toward an activation that would doom the planet regardless of who controlled the skies above it. "We're not done yet," Marcus said grimly, checking the charge on his rifle. "That tower needs to come down, and I doubt the fleet has a clean shot at it while it's surrounded by their remaining ground forces. Radio command. Tell them we're moving in." As the human fleet pressed its advantage in orbit, forcing the remaining Dominion warships into an increasingly desperate defensive position above Chicago, General Elena Cruz received updates from both the orbital battle and ground resistance efforts simultaneously, coordinating a response that required perfect timing between two very different fronts of the same war. "Admiral Thorne reports the Dominion fleet is pinned above the tower's location," an officer informed her, "but ground forces indicate the tower's defensive perimeter remains heavily fortified. Resistance teams are moving into position, but will need close air support to have any real chance of breaching the perimeter." Elena studied the tactical maps spread across her command table, calculating the risks and possibilities, with the same careful precision she had applied to every decision over the past 20 years. "Contact Admiral Thorne. Tell him we need a strike team of Falcons to break away from the main battle and provide close air support for the ground assault. I know it weakens his position in the orbital fight, but if that tower activates, none of this matters anyway." The order was relayed within minutes, and Admiral Thorne, despite the risk of weakening his forces during an already intense battle, agreed without hesitation. "Detach the 3rd Falcon Squadron," he ordered. "Captain Torres, your team is going planet-side. Priority target, the Resonance Tower's defensive perimeter. Support ground forces in destroying that structure by any means necessary." Jake Torres felt his heart rate spike as the order came through. This was it, the moment his training had truly been building toward, not just fighting other ships in the emptiness of space, but descending into the heart of the battle on Earth's own soil, fighting to save the very planet his family called home. "Copy that, Admiral," Jake replied, already banking his Falcon toward Earth's atmosphere. "3rd Squadron, form up on me. Let's go bring that tower down." As Jake's squadron broke away from the main fleet and began their descent through Earth's atmosphere, streaks of fire trailing behind their ships from the friction of re-entry, the battle above Chicago entered its most critical phase. The fate of the Resonance Tower, and with it, the fate of Earth's atmosphere and every living thing upon the planet's surface, now rested in the hands of a small squadron of fighter pilots and a scattered resistance force fighting with whatever weapons they could find. Above them, the remnants of the Dominion fleet fought on with grim determination, knowing that everything their empire had built across 11 conquered worlds now hinged on protecting a single tower from destruction. Overlord Dravask, watching his once overwhelming force reduced to a desperate defensive stand, felt something he had never experienced in his long career of conquest. For the first time, he felt genuine fear. "All remaining forces," he ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. "Protect the tower. Nothing else matters now. If it activates, this battle becomes irrelevant. We simply need to hold long enough." But as Jake Torres's squadron screamed down through the clouds above Chicago, weapons already charging for their first strike, and as Marcus Webb's resistance team moved into position around the tower's perimeter, it was clear that the Dominion's confidence in their ancient strategy of overwhelming force was crumbling against an enemy they had never expected to face. An enemy that had spent 20 years preparing, in secret, for exactly this moment. The final battle for Earth's survival was only just beginning. Jake Torres's Falcon broke through the clouds above Chicago at incredible speed. The ruined city spread out below him, like a scar on the earth. Smoke rose from dozens of fires, and in the distance, the resonance tower pulsed with its sickly purple light, taller now than when he had last seen images of it, its energy field visibly stronger even from this distance. "Third Squadron, form up," Jake called over the comm, as the rest of his pilots emerged from the clouds behind him. "We've got a defensive perimeter to break. Watch for ground-to-air batteries. They'll have those positioned around the tower for exactly this kind of attack." Below, the resonance tower's defensive perimeter came into sharper focus. Dozens of Dominion soldiers manned anti-aircraft emplacements arranged in a wide circle around the base of the tower, their weapons already tracking the incoming human fighters. Beyond the immediate perimeter, armored vehicles patrolled the streets, ready to reinforce any breach in the defensive line. "This isn't going to be easy," Malin observed, her voice tight as she studied the defensive formation spread out below them. "Nothing about today has been easy," Jake replied. "Let's get to work. Squadron, break into attack pairs. Target the anti-aircraft emplacements first. We need to open a path for the ground teams." The Falcons dove toward the tower's perimeter, plasma cannons blazing as the Dominion's ground defenses opened fire in response. Bright streaks of energy crisscrossed the sky as pilots wove between incoming fire, each pair of Falcons working together to eliminate one anti-aircraft position after another. On the ground, hidden in the rubble of a collapsed parking structure roughly 400 meters from the tower's perimeter, Marcus Webb watched the aerial battle unfold with grim satisfaction. "That's our cue," he said to his team. "Once they clear a gap in that defensive line, we move in fast. Remember, our job is to plant the charges on the tower's base support structure. Command believes destroying the foundation will be more effective than trying to damage the tower itself directly." Priya checked the explosive charges strapped to her back one final time, her hands steady despite the danger of what they were about to attempt. "How much explosive do we actually need to bring that thing down?" "More than we're carrying, probably," Marcus admitted honestly. "But Command's engineers think, if we can compromise the foundation enough, the tower's own weight and energy output will do the rest. We just need to create the right kind of damage in the right place." Above them, Jake's squadron continued their assault on the tower's defenses, slowly but steadily punching holes in the Dominion's perimeter. Jake banked his Falcon sharply to avoid a burst of anti-aircraft fire, then fired back at the source, watching the emplacement erupt in a satisfying burst of flame. 3 emplacements down, he reported, working on the 4th. But as the human fighters continued their assault, Dominion reinforcements began arriving from nearby positions, armored ground vehicles rolling toward the tower's perimeter to shore up the weakening defenses. Overlord Dravask, watching the battle unfold from tactical reports relayed up to the Void Reaper, understood immediately what the human fighters were attempting to accomplish. "They're trying to clear a path for ground forces," he said to Keswick, his mind racing to formulate a response, even as his own fleet continued fighting a desperate holding action in orbit above. "Order all available reserve units to converge on the tower's location immediately. That structure must be protected at all costs." Reserve Dominion soldiers, pulled from other positions across the city, began rushing toward the tower's perimeter, adding their weapons to the already substantial defensive line. Marcus watched through a pair of battered binoculars as the enemy forces multiplied before his eyes. "They're reinforcing," he said grimly. "We need to move now, before that line gets any stronger." "Sergeant, That's suicide, Danny said, his voice tight with fear. There's got to be 50 of them down there now, maybe more. Marcus looked at his small team, 12 fighters against a rapidly growing enemy force, and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Every mission carried risk, but this one carried the fate of the entire planet. I know it's dangerous, Marcus said quietly. But if that tower activates, none of us survive anyway. Not really. Not for long. This might be our only chance to stop it. I won't order any of you to come with me, but I'm going. There was a moment of silence, and then, one by one, every member of his team nodded their agreement. Priya stepped forward first. We're with you, Sergeant, all the way. As Marcus's team prepared to make their desperate push toward the tower, Jake Torres's squadron continued their aerial assault, slowly grinding down the Dominion's anti-aircraft capabilities, despite the arrival of reinforcements. But the cost was mounting. Jake watched with a sinking heart as one of his squadron mates, a young pilot named Ortiz, took a direct hit and spiraled toward the ground in a trail of smoke and flame. Ortiz is down, May called out urgently. No parachute deployment detected. Jake felt a surge of grief and anger, but forced himself to stay focused on the mission. There would be time to mourn later, if there was a later at all. Keep pushing, he ordered, his voice tight with controlled emotion. We can't stop now. Too many people are counting on us. The squadron pressed forward, and slowly, painfully, a gap began to open in the tower's defensive perimeter. It was not a large gap, and it would not stay open for long, but it was enough. Marcus watched from his position in the rubble as the anti-aircraft fire from one section of the defensive line finally fell silent. That's our window, Marcus said. Move now, fast and quiet as we can. Priya, Danny, you're with me on the direct approach. The rest of you provide covering fire from the flanks. Marcus's team burst from their hiding position and sprinted toward the gap in the Dominion's defenses, weapons ready, hearts pounding with adrenaline and fear. Dominion soldiers, distracted by the ongoing aerial assault, were slow to notice the ground team's approach, giving Marcus and his fighters precious seconds to close the distance. They made it nearly 200 meters before a Dominion patrol spotted them, alarm calls ringing out in the harsh, clicking language of the Corvith Dominion. Weapons fire erupted from multiple directions as the enemy soldiers scrambled to respond to this unexpected ground assault. Keep moving, Marcus shouted, returning fire as his team pushed forward through the chaos. Beside him, Priya fired her rifle with practiced precision, dropping 2 Dominion soldiers who had emerged from cover to block their path. The team fought their way through the outer perimeter, taking losses along the way. Danny went down with a serious wound to his leg, forcing 2 of the team's fighters to help him to cover, while the rest continued the push toward the tower's base. It was brutal, desperate fighting, every step forward paid for in blood and sacrifice. Finally, Marcus and Priya reached the base of the tower itself, close enough now to feel the strange, uncomfortable hum of energy radiating from the structure. Up close, the tower was even more massive than it had appeared from a distance, its black surface covered in strange, glowing symbols that pulsed in time with the same slow rhythm they had observed in the satellite images. Plant the charges, Marcus ordered, already moving toward the tower's base support structure with the explosives strapped to his back. We don't have much time before more reinforcements arrive. Priya worked quickly alongside him, attaching explosive charges to key points along the tower's foundation, following the specifications provided by Prometheus's engineering teams. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, despite the chaos of battle continuing around them, gunfire and explosions echoing from every direction as the remaining members of their team fought to hold back approaching Dominion reinforcements. Charges are set, Priya said finally, stepping back from the tower's base. We need 30 seconds to get clear before detonation. Then let's move, Marcus said, already turning to retreat toward the cover their remaining team members were providing. But as they turned, a squad of Dominion soldiers rounded the corner of a nearby building, weapons already raised and firing. Marcus felt a burning pain tear through his shoulder as a shot grazed him, spinning him around and nearly knocking him off his feet. Priya grabbed his arm, helping to steady him as they continued their retreat, returning fire as best they could, while putting distance between themselves and the tower. Above, Jake Torres watched the ground battle unfold on his tactical display, feeding information from the resistance team's transponder signals. Command. Ground team reports charges are set. He relayed to Prometheus Command. They need air support to cover their retreat. Copy that, 3rd Squadron, came the reply. Provide whatever cover you can. Jake banked his Falcon sharply, diving toward the approaching Dominion reinforcements that threatened to overwhelm Marcus's retreating team. His plasma cannons tore into the enemy formation, scattering soldiers and buying precious seconds for the resistance fighters to escape to safety. Go, 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 Marcus shouted to his team as they scrambled away from the tower's base, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the explosive charges, now counting down toward detonation. They had made it nearly 300 meters when the charges finally detonated. The explosion was massive, far larger than the size of the charges alone would have suggested, as the tower's own stored energy reacted violently to the sudden structural damage. A blinding flash of purple and orange light erupted from the base of the structure, followed by a deafening roar as the tower's foundation crumbled beneath it. Marcus and his team were thrown to the ground by the force of the shockwave, debris raining down around them as the massive structure began to topple. For a terrifying moment, it seemed as though the tower might fall directly on top of their position, but the structure's collapse angled slightly away from them, crashing down into a cluster of abandoned buildings, instead with a sound like the end of the world. As the dust and debris began to settle, Marcus slowly picked himself up from the ground, his ears ringing and his shoulder throbbing with pain, but alive. He looked back at where the tower had once stood, now nothing more than a smoking pile of twisted black metal and shattered stone. We did it, Priya said, disbelief evident in her voice as she helped Marcus to his feet. We actually did it. High above, the destruction of the resonance tower sent shockwaves through the remaining Dominion forces, both figuratively and, in the tactical sense that mattered most, literally. Overlord Dravask, watching the towers collapse on his tactical display aboard the Void Reaper, felt a cold weight settle in his chest that he had never experienced before in his long career of conquest. The tower has been destroyed, Keswick reported, his voice barely above a whisper, as if saying the words too loudly might make the disaster somehow more real. Dravask stared at the display in silence for a long moment. 11 worlds had fallen to the Dominion's methodical, overwhelming approach to conquest. 11 worlds had never come close to inflicting this kind of defeat on Dominion forces. Everything he understood about warfare, about the natural order of conquest and submission, was being systematically dismantled by this small, stubborn planet and its secret fleet. Overlord, orders? Keswick asked, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. For a long moment, Dravask said nothing, staring at the tactical display, where human forces continued to press their advantage across both the orbital battle and the ground engagement below. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with a decision that went against everything the Dominion's military doctrine had taught him. Signal all remaining forces, he said quietly. Prepare for full withdrawal from Earth's atmosphere and orbit. We cannot win this engagement with our current forces. I will not throw away more ships and soldiers in a battle we have already lost. It was, in the long history of the Corvith Dominion's conquests, an unprecedented order. No Dominion commander had ever ordered a full withdrawal from an active invasion. But Dravask understood, with the cold clarity that came from watching his overwhelming advantage crumble against an enemy far more capable than any intelligence report had suggested, that continuing this battle would only result in the total destruction of his fleet. As the order rippled through the remaining Dominion forces, ships that had spent days establishing dominance over Earth's skies began a slow, humiliating retreat toward the edge of the solar system. Admiral Thorne watched the withdrawal unfold on the Liberty's tactical display, with cautious relief, still wary of some hidden trick or trap. Admiral, the Dominion fleet is retreating, Commander Ruiz reported, disbelief evident in her voice. All remaining vessels are breaking off engagement and moving toward the outer system. Thorne allowed himself a long breath, the tension of the battle slowly beginning to drain from his shoulders, though he remained cautious. Continue monitoring their movement. I want confirmation this isn't some kind of tactical repositioning before we celebrate anything. But get me a channel to General Cruz. She needs to know what's happening up here. Down on Earth, as news of the tower's destruction and the Dominion's retreat began spreading through resistance networks and eventually to the general population, something remarkable began happening in cities around the world. People who had spent days cowering in fear, watching their world seemingly fall to an unstoppable alien empire, began to emerge from hiding, staring up at skies that were, for the first time in days, free of the black shapes of Dominion warships. It was not over. Both Marcus Webb, nursing his wounded shoulder amid the ruins of the tower he had helped destroy, and Admiral Thorne, watching the retreating Dominion fleet with wary caution, understood that this victory, however significant, was likely only the first battle in a much longer war. The Corveth Dominion had conquered 11 worlds. They would not simply accept this defeat and walk away forever. But for the first time since the green light had first appeared in the sky, humanity had proven something undeniable to itself, and to the watching universe beyond. Earth would not fall easily. Earth would fight back, with everything it had, and it had far more than anyone, including the Dominion itself, had ever expected. The battle for Earth's skies had been won, but the war for humanity's survival was only just beginning. 3 days after the Dominion's retreat, General Elena Cruz stood in the ruins of Chicago, staring up at the twisted, fallen remains of the Resonance Tower. Cleanup crews worked around her, clearing debris and helping survivors, while military engineers studied the wreckage to better understand the technology the Dominion had used, hoping to learn anything that might help prepare for the war's next phase. The air still smelled faintly of smoke and scorched metal, a reminder of how close the world had come to a very different fate. Marcus Webb approached her slowly, his arm in a sling from the wound he had taken during the assault on the tower's base. He looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from more than just lack of sleep, but there was something steady in his eyes, a quiet pride that came from knowing he had played a part in saving his world. "General Cruz," he said, offering a respectful nod. "Sergeant Webb," Elena replied, extending her hand. "I've read the reports. What you and your team did here, it made all the difference. Without that tower's destruction, this battle might have gone very differently, no matter what Prometheus accomplished in orbit." Marcus shook her hand firmly. "We lost people out there, General. Ortiz went down providing air support. Danny's going to need months to recover from his leg wound. It wasn't easy." "No," Elena agreed quietly. "It never is. But because of what you did, and what people like you did in cities all around the world, we have a chance now. A real chance." They stood together in silence for a moment, looking out over the ruined city, a landscape of destruction that would take years to fully rebuild. But amid the rubble, signs of resilience were already visible everywhere. Volunteers worked alongside military personnel to clear streets and help injured civilians. Children who had spent days hiding in basements now played cautiously in open spaces, watched over by parents who finally allowed themselves to relax, even if only slightly. Aboard the ISS Liberty, now docked temporarily in Earth orbit for repairs and resupply, Admiral Thorne walked through corridors filled with the sounds of celebration mixed with mourning. Crews who had fought the battle of their lives just days earlier moved between quiet moments of grief for lost comrades and genuine joy at having survived and won against odds that had seemed impossible. He found Captain Jake Torres in the ship's small medical bay, where the young pilot was getting a minor injury to his arm, treated after a rough landing during the final stages of the battle. Jake looked up as the Admiral approached, offering a tired but genuine smile. "Admiral," Jake said, "any word on casualty numbers?" Thorne's expression grew somber. "We lost 18 ships in the orbital engagement, and several hundred personnel across the fleet. It's not nothing, Captain. Every loss matters. But considering what we were facing, considering the size and strength of their fleet, it could have been so much worse." Jake nodded, thinking of Ortiz, his squadron mate who hadn't made it back. "Was it worth it, Admiral? All those years of secrecy, all that waiting?" Thorne considered the question seriously before answering. "I've asked myself that same thing more times than I can count over the past few days. We let this invasion happen. We let cities burn, let people suffer, all while we waited for the right moment to strike. That's a weight I'll carry for the rest of my life, Captain, and so will General Cruz, and so will everyone who knew about Prometheus and chose to keep it hidden until now." He paused, looking out through the small viewport in the medical bay at the blue curve of Earth below them, scarred, but still turning, still alive. "But if we had revealed Prometheus too early, if we had thrown this fleet into battle before it was ready, we would have lost, completely and permanently. Instead, we're here. Earth is still ours, and the Dominion knows now that conquering this planet will cost them far more than they're willing to pay. I have to believe that makes it worth it, even with everything we lost along the way. Back on Earth, President Sarah Whitfield addressed the nation, and indeed the entire world, in a broadcast that reached nearly every surviving communication network across the planet. She stood in front of a podium in a temporary government facility, her expression a careful balance of grief for what had been lost, and hope for what had been saved. 6 days ago, she began, her voice steady, despite the enormity of what she was about to explain. Our world was invaded by a force far beyond anything we believed possible. We lost cities, we lost countless lives, and for those 6 days, many of you believed that our world's fate rested entirely in the hands of an enemy we could not hope to match. She paused, taking a breath before continuing. What most of you did not know is that, for the past 20 years, dedicated men and women around this world worked in complete secrecy to prepare for exactly this possibility. They built a fleet, hidden in the depths of our solar system, using technology developed from the very limited fragments of evidence we had that we were not alone in this universe. That fleet is called Prometheus, and 6 days ago, it flew home to defend us. Across the world, people watched the broadcast in stunned silence, learning for the first time the true story behind the mysterious fleet that had appeared in Earth's skies and turned the tide of an unwinnable war. Some felt anger at having been kept in the dark for so long, at having suffered through days of invasion, while their leaders held back a secret weapon. Others felt only relief and gratitude, understanding on some level the impossible calculations that had gone into every decision made during those terrible days. I will not pretend that every choice made during this crisis was easy, or that all of them were without cost, President Whitfield continued. We made the painful decision to wait, to allow the Dominion's forces to spread themselves across our planet before revealing our true strength. That decision cost lives. It cost cities. And I understand if many of you find that difficult to forgive. Her voice grew stronger, more resolute. But because of that decision, because of the sacrifice and dedication of everyone involved in Project Prometheus, and because of the courage of ordinary citizens who fought back against impossible odds in cities around the world, we won. The Corvette Dominion has retreated from our solar system, their invasion force broken and humiliated by a planet they believed would fall easily. In the ruins of Chicago, Marcus Webb watched the broadcast on a portable screen set up by military personnel, surrounded by members of his resistance team, including Danny, still recovering, but alert and listening intently. Priya stood beside Marcus, her expression thoughtful, as the president continued speaking. This victory does not mean our struggle is over, Whitfield said, her tone shifting to something more serious and forward-looking. The Corvette Dominion has conquered 11 other worlds throughout their history. It is extremely unlikely they will simply accept this defeat and never return. We must use this time, however much of it we have, to prepare ourselves further, to strengthen our defenses, and to ensure that when they do return, we are ready for them once again. She looked directly into the camera, her expression filled with a determination that seemed to reach through the screen to everyone watching around the world. But today, we celebrate a victory that many believed impossible. Today, we honor those we lost, and we remember that even facing an empire that had never known defeat, humanity found a way to fight back. We are not alone in this universe, and we now know that we are not defenseless either. Whatever comes next, we will face it together, as we face this. The broadcast ended, and across the world, in cities still smoking from the recent invasion, in resistance hideouts turned victory celebrations, in military command centers monitoring the retreating Dominion fleet, people began the long, difficult process of processing what had happened and beginning to rebuild. 2 weeks later, General Elena Cruz stood once again in her command center, now operating openly, rather than in secret, for the first time in 20 years. The room had a different energy now, filled with purpose, rather than the constant tension of maintaining a hidden project. Admiral Thorne joined her via secure video link from the ISS Liberty, still stationed in Earth orbit, now openly serving as humanity's first line of defense, rather than a secret held in the shadows. "How are the repairs coming along, James?" Elena asked. "Slowly, but steadily," Thorne replied. We lost 18 ships in the battle, and several more sustained damage that will take months to fully repair. But the good news is, our shipyards in the asteroid belt no longer need to operate in secrecy. We're already seeing a massive increase in resources and personnel, now that the public understands what we're building and why. Elena nodded, reviewing reports on her console that detailed the rapid expansion of Prometheus's shipbuilding capacity, now that the program operated with full public and governmental support, rather than hidden black budgets and secretive recruitment. The world's governments have agreed to fund an expanded fleet, doubling our current numbers over the next 5 years. We're also getting significant scientific cooperation now, researchers from around the world working together to study what we recovered from Dominion wreckage. That's good news, Thorne said, because if there's one thing I learned from this battle, it's that the Dominion won't make the same mistakes twice. Next time they come, they'll come better prepared, with a full understanding of what they're facing. We need to be ready for that. We will be, Elena said with quiet confidence. We have something now that we didn't have 20 years ago, when this program started in complete secrecy and uncertainty. We have proof that it works. We have an entire world united behind rebuilding and strengthening our defenses, and we have people like Sergeant Webb and Captain Torres, ordinary citizens who proved that courage and determination can make a real difference, even against an empire that had never known defeat. In a quiet corner of what remained of Chicago, Marcus Webb stood at a small memorial that had been erected for those who had died during the resistance efforts against the tower, including several members of his own team who hadn't survived the fighting. He placed a small stone at the base of the memorial, a quiet gesture of remembrance that felt more meaningful than any grand speech could have been. Priya joined him a few minutes later, carrying 2 cups of coffee that had become available again, now that basic supply lines were being restored. She handed one to Marcus silently, and they stood together for a while, watching the sun set over a city that was slowly, painfully beginning to heal. What happens now? Priya asked eventually. For us, I mean. The resistance doesn't really exist anymore, does it? Not now that the military's operating in the open again. Marcus considered the question for a long moment before answering. I've been asked to join Prometheus's ground forces training program. They want experienced fighters to help train new recruits, people who understand what it actually takes to fight this kind of war, not just the theory of it. Are you going to accept? Priya asked. I think so, Marcus said. This isn't over, Priya. The Dominion is going to come back eventually, and when they do, we need to be ready. Not just Prometheus, but everyone. I want to help make sure that when that day comes, we're even more prepared than we were this time. Priya smiled slightly, looking out at the city around them. I think I'd like to help with that too, if they'll have me. High above Earth, in the vast darkness of space beyond the outer edges of the solar system, the remnants of the Corvette Dominion's invasion fleet continued their long journey back toward the heart of their empire. Overlord Dravask stood on the bridge of the Void Reaper, staring out at the stars, contemplating the report he would soon need to deliver to the Dominion's ruling council, a report describing a defeat unlike anything in their empire's long, otherwise unbroken history of conquest. They will not be pleased, Keswick said quietly, standing beside him. No, Dravask agreed. They will not be pleased at all. 11 successful conquests, and now this. A world we believe to be primitive, insignificant, easily subdued, has humiliated us in a way that will echo throughout the empire for generations to come. He paused, considering something that had been weighing on his mind since the battle's end. But perhaps there is value in this defeat as well, Keswick. We underestimated Earth because our initial survey suggested weakness. We failed to detect a fleet built in complete secrecy over 20 years, hidden using methods and technology that our sensors were never designed to identify. That is a mistake the Dominion cannot afford to repeat. What do you mean, Overlord? Keswick asked. I mean that Earth has taught us something valuable, even in our defeat, Dravask said, his gaze still fixed on the distant stars. We will return to that world eventually, better prepared, better informed, and with a full understanding of what we are truly facing. Earth's leaders believe they have won a lasting victory today. What they have actually won is time, nothing more and nothing less. As the Dominion fleet continued its long retreat toward the heart of their empire, and as Earth began the slow process of healing and rebuilding, while simultaneously preparing for whatever might come next, One truth remained clear to everyone involved in this first, dramatic chapter of humanity's encounter with the wider universe. The battle for Earth had been won, through decades of secret sacrifice, incredible courage, and a fleet built in the shadows for exactly this moment. But the war for humanity's survival among the stars was only just beginning, and Earth, now aware of its place in a much larger, more dangerous universe than anyone had ever imagined, would spend every day preparing for the moment when the Corvette Dominion, or perhaps some other threat entirely, would return to test humanity's resolve once again. For now, though, Earth's skies were clear. Its people, battered but unbroken, looked toward the future with a newfound understanding of their own strength, and a quiet, steady determination to ensure that whatever came next, they would be ready to face it together, as one united world, no longer alone in the universe, and no longer defenseless against whatever darkness might yet emerge from among the stars. The fire that Prometheus had carried home still burned, a beacon of hope and warning both, promising that humanity, once pushed to the very edge of extinction, had discovered within itself a strength it had never fully understood before. And that strength, forged in secrecy and tested in fire, would carry them forward into whatever challenges the future still held in store.